Star Wars has always been about big names and big destinies. The Skywalkers, the Chosen Ones, the Jedi who light up the screen like rock stars with glow sticks. But then Andor comes along and says, nope, the galaxy does not actually run on magical bloodlines, it runs on ordinary people. And that is both terrifying and kind of brilliant. Because suddenly the story is not about legends saving the day, it is about faceless nobodies deciding they have had enough. Think about it. The prisoners of Narkina 5 were not trained warriors. They were guys in bare feet stacking machinery for a faceless empire that never even planned to let them leave. And yet when the chance came, they rose up with nothing but fists, courage, and one guy yelling one way out, over and over like it was the world's most dangerous motivational seminar. That is rebellion in its rawest form, and it hits harder than any prophecy ever could. And it is not just prisoners. The people of Ferrix go from quiet workers to full-blown revolutionaries. The second Marva's funeral becomes a spark. These are shopkeepers, mechanics, and labourers throwing bricks at stormtroopers because they have nothing left to lose. That scene is not background fluff, it is the point. The rebellion was not built on Luke's farm boy angst or Leia's royal speeches. It was built on anonymous faces deciding enough is enough. The irony is that the Empire never saw it coming. They were so busy chasing Jedi, hunting senators, and playing political chess that they ignored the very people holding up the system. Andor shows us what happens when those nobodies stop cooperating. The entire machine starts breaking down. It is darkly funny when you realise the most powerful regime in the galaxy was toppled not by destiny, but by unpaid overtime and angry citizens with improvised weapons. And that is what makes it both inspiring and uncomfortable. Because if Star Wars is right, then the real power does not lie with heroes in capes or emperors on thrones. It lies with ordinary people who finally say no. That means rebellion is not just possible, it is inevitable when oppression pushes too far. And that truth is scarier than any Sith Lord could ever be. In this video, we are going to dig into how Andor flips the script on Star Wars mythology, why nameless sacrifices hit harder than chosen heroes, how the Empire's greatest weakness was never Jedi, but the faceless workers it ignored, and why the fall of Palpatine's regime had less to do with destiny and more to do with nobodies deciding they were done being silent. When we think of Star Wars heroes, the first names that come to mind are always the same. Luke Skywalker, Princess Leia, Obi-Wan Kenobi. The legends whose faces plaster posters and lunchboxes across decades. But then Andor comes along and flips the script. Suddenly the story is not about chosen ones or glowing lightsabers, it is about factory workers, prisoners, and ordinary citizens we barely know by name. And that sparks a question worth asking. Why would Star Wars take the spotlight away from Jedi and royalty and instead put it on nameless people with no grand destiny? The answer is curiosity itself. Because when you remove the myth and just show the galaxy as it is, you reveal something far more unsettling. That the Empire does not collapse from one duel between titans, it collapses because ordinary people decide they are finished being silent. Look at the prisoners of Narkina 5. Nobody knows their names, nobody remembers their families, but when they chant one way out, their faceless rebellion shakes the entire system. These were men the Empire thought were invisible, yet their collective defiance made them unstoppable. That moment makes you lean in, wondering if these forgotten nobodies were the true key all along. The factory workers Cassian hides among on Ferrix, or the silent labourers tightening bolts in Imperial prisons do not look like heroes, and they look like extras. But that is exactly the point. Andor forces us to notice them, to realise that faceless nobodies are the very foundation of rebellion. The curiosity builds every time you watch the show, because suddenly you wonder how many revolutions in history were not sparked by great leaders or legendary figures, but by ordinary people, the kind history books rarely bother to name. And once you see that, the frustration kicks in. Because for decades Star Wars has sold us the idea that only the chosen few can change the galaxy. Jedi Knights, Sith Lords, royal heirs, Skywalkers with destiny written into their DNA. And meanwhile, the actual people doing the heavy lifting, the ones suffering under the Empire's boot every single day, get treated like background noise. Think about the original trilogy. We cheer when Luke blows up the Death Star, but what about the countless rebel pilots who died just to clear a path? Their sacrifices barely get a line of dialogue. We praise the bravery of Han Solo swooping in at the last second, but what about the ground soldiers on Hoth freezing and dying just to buy time for the evacuation? The focus is always on the big names, while the nobodies fade away. Andor refuses to play along with that myth. It shows us people like Kino Loy, a man who never leaves prison but inspires hundreds to escape. Or Marva Andor, an old woman in a crumbling town whose funeral speech becomes a spark that ignites open rebellion. These are not chosen ones, they are regular people pushed to their breaking point. And their defiance feels 10 times more real than a prophecy ever could. Beneath the frustration lies sorrow, because when you focus on the nameless rebels, you realise how much was lost. These were not mythical heroes destined for greatness. They were ordinary people with families, lives and dreams. And the rebellion demanded all of it from them. The prison escape on Narkina 5 is exhilarating, but it is also gut-wrenching. Hundreds leap into the water, desperate for freedom, and most of them never make it. Their names are not remembered. Their families never know what happened, but their sacrifice echoes through the galaxy. That is not just thrilling, it is tragic. Ferrix drives the sorrow even deeper. Citizens standing shoulder to shoulder against armoured stormtroopers, knowing full well they may not survive. The sight of B-Twemo projecting Marva's last words while blaster fire erupts in the streets is both inspiring and devastating. Because you know most of those people will not live to see victory. And then there is Kino, a man who finds his courage, leads an impossible uprising, and then admits he cannot swim. His fate is left uncertain, but the sorrow is unbearable because his leadership mattered, and yet he will never be remembered as a hero. He is one of countless faceless rebels who disappear into the cracks of history. That sorrow defines Andor, the realization that rebellion is built not on triumphs alone, but on countless unseen sacrifices by people the galaxy will never know. And yet, within the sorrow there is awe. Because seeing ordinary people rise up against the Empire with nothing but their willpower is one of the most powerful images Star Wars has ever given us. The spectacle's not in lightsaber duels, but in the raw courage of nobodies refusing to bow. The prison break is awe-inspiring not because of force powers or secret weapons, but because hundreds of men chanted together, charged unarmed guards and won. It is sheer human spirit, overwhelming a machine built on fear. That kind of spectacle leaves you breathless. Ferrix is just as awe-inspiring. An entire town marching together, drums pounding, voices raised, standing against the Empire without flinching. When violence erupts, the sight of citizens throwing bricks and fighting stormtroopers with bare hands carries more weight than any space battle, because it feels real, raw, and terrifyingly possible. Even the smallest acts inspire awe. A worker sabotaging equipment, a prisoner refusing to break, a mother speaking truth even in death. These are sparks that ignite fire, and the show frames them with cinematic intensity that elevates ordinary defiance into myth. The awe of Andor is that it proves rebellion does not need destiny. It needs courage. And that courage can come from anyone, no matter how faceless, nameless, or ordinary they seem. Because if ordinary people can topple empires in Star Wars, maybe the same is true in our own world. The show argues that power is not invincible, it is fragile, and it only takes enough people saying no to break it apart. Hope is scattered across Andor like seeds. Nemik's manifesto, written by a young man who dies before his vision spreads, becomes a beacon for others. Marva's final words inspire an entire community to rise. Kino's leadership saves hundreds, even if he never escapes himself. These moments remind us that hope often outlives the people who create it. The hope of Andor is not naive or easy. It does not come from chosen heroes swooping in at the last second. It comes from people who risk everything with no guarantee of success, yet still act because it is the only way forward. That is hope forged in fire, the kind that lasts. Even Cassian's journey embodies hope. He begins as a man who only cares about himself, but by the end he realizes that he is part of something larger. His growth proves that anyone can choose to stand, no matter how small they feel. That choice is the very definition of hope. So while the story of faceless nobodies is tragic, it is also hopeful, because it reminds us that the smallest sparks can grow into fires that light the galaxy. At the end of it all, the resolution is bittersweet. The empire did not fall because of destiny or prophecy. It fell because faceless nobodies decided they had nothing left to lose. That truth is both empowering and tragic. The tragedy is that most of them will never be remembered. Their names lost, their lives erased, their sacrifices buried under the legends of Skywalkers and Jedi. History forgets the nobodies even as their actions reshape everything. And that is the cruel reality of rebellion. But the resolution is also powerful, because Andor makes us remember them. It forces us to confront the truth that empires are not toppled by heroes alone, but by countless ordinary people standing together. And in doing so, it redefines what Star Wars has always been about. The legacy of these faceless rebels is not in statues or songs, but in the freedom they carved out with their blood and courage. They are the invisible foundation on which legends are built. And the show makes sure we never forget that again. So yes, faceless nobodies took down the Empire. And that is the point. Because rebellion has never belonged to the chosen few. It has always belonged to the many, the unseen, and the forgotten who dared to fight anyway.
Thank you for watching. Be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that share button. My main channel is Critical Analysis Hub, where I post Star Wars content about the movies. My secondary channel is Critical Analysis Hub Plus, where I focus on the shows of Star Wars. And my third channel is Critical Analysis Hub XP, where I post comic books. Be sure to take a moment and check them out. Thanks, and may the Force be with you.